Well, guys, here we are at the end of our Star Wars journey. The beginning of this year, I started with this idea that I would review everything to do with Star Wars, from the movies to the TV shows to the spin-offs to the TV movies. And here we are at the end of our journey, talking about one of the worst pieces of Star Wars media out there, the Star Wars Holiday Special. The Star Wars Holiday Special came out in 1978, just after the release of the first movie, Star Wars, and is considered one of the most infamous Christmas specials, or holiday specials, whatever you want to call it, of all time, and being absolutely the worst thing with the Star Wars name attached to it. So much so that George Lucas himself tried to get rid of every master copy of this so that it could never be shown ever again. And of course, that hasn't happened because we are talking about it here today, and I have seen it, and yes, it is pretty bad, guys. The Star Wars Holiday Special is one of those things that you think that can't possibly exist. And then you go online and realize it does, and you just sit down and cry a little bit, because it's just insane that this thing even exists, that George Lucas even agreed to do something. I mean, for something he's ashamed of, he should have known from the start that this was just going to be a complete disaster, and it ultimately is. Following the story of Chewbacca's family on the planet of Kashyyyk as they are waiting for him to arrive home so that they can celebrate Life Day that's the plot of the story, but then we have other things involved in this story. It's basically a big, giant variety show, and it has so much stuff to offer, like infomercials, cartoons, musical numbers, and a whole lot more, including comedy and parts where you can't even figure out what the actors are saying because it is all in Wookieese. Now, yes, this special is absolutely terrible. This is one of the worst things I have ever had to sit through. I mean, this thing is just under 2 hours, and every 20 minutes feels like an hour has passed by. It is extremely boring and slow, with very little happening and very little in terms of enjoyment. There's not even anything like so bad it's funny. I mean, there's a couple moments here and there. I did laugh quite a bit at the beginning at the ridiculousness of it, but it was ultimately just a chore to sit through. However, that said, there are some things that I do kind of like with this special, and I mean, they're not great things to praise it about, but they are interesting little things. Like, this is the first time we ever get to see the planet of Kashyyyk, or at least a large matte painting in the background, but it is really interesting because we wouldn't see this stuff brought into fruition until Revenge of the Sith, and we see that a lot of things actually carry over, such as the Wookiees living in giant tree houses, and that design carries over to Revenge of the Sith. So it is actually very interesting that this actually develops something that would come later, and I think is actually really, really cool. And then also there is this animated bit that gives us the first representation of Boba Fett, unless you watch the Star Wars Special Editions, where Boba Fett is implemented in the first movie. So that is actually very interesting that he showed up for the first time in this in animated form, and it's kind of cool. And this animated segment is actually kind of interesting because it reminded me a lot of the animation style for droids, and I wonder if this little animated bit was just kind of like a test run for what they could maybe do with a droids type show, because it is very similar animation. And it's really cool, like, looking at the animation and seeing how it is very similar. But I can say that the animation is also very bizarre, especially when it comes to the look of Luke Skywalker and especially Han Solo, who looks horrific in this animation. But overall, I think it's kind of neat, it's kind of cool, but really, I mean, it's not that good still. And then there is also something else that I kind of enjoyed, which was there's this segment with a bar on Tatooine with B. Arthur in it, and there's a giant musical number with her, and it deals with her trying to get her patrons out of the bar, out of the cantina, because the Empire has closed them down. And, I mean, it's bad, but B. Arthur is kind of entertaining with it. I think she's actually kind of giving a damn in it. And, I mean, overall, it's completely harmless. It's not the best thing ever. In fact, this is the best thing in this special. But, yeah, that's basically the good of this. Now, everything else in this is really, really bad, guys. As I said before, that there's parts of this special where the Wookiees just talk and there's no subtitles. I mean, it's kind of like with the original Star Wars movies. I mean, Chewbacca doesn't get any subtitles, but there are at least 20 minutes in the beginning of this special of Wookiees just yelling at each other, and you have no idea what they're saying, and it makes it excruciatingly long. And it's awful, guys, and there's other stuff in this, like I said, that there's infomercials that go into so much detail that it is very boring and very hard to watch. There is one moment that is actually kind of laugh out loud funny, and that is when Chewbacca's dad watches VR porn. Okay, yeah, so there's this moment where Chewbacca's dad watches VR porn where he puts this visor over his head, and there's this woman, I can't remember the singer's name, but she starts singing, and she also just starts talking about, like, fantasy, and, like, she is his fantasy, and, like, she makes these moaning noises, and it is incredibly erotic and so awkward that it exists, and is just, you just can't believe it exists. You can't believe your eyes. You can't believe what you are actually seeing is real. And the rest of the special is just very bland and boring with, you know, just all these different characters coming around saying really corny dialogue, and it's just really acted poorly, and there's just no reason for this to exist. Now, what's interesting is they also get the cast of Star Wars to be in this. So we get Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, and Peter Mayhew, and Harrison Ford, and others, and it's just like, you can tell they don't give a crap what is happening in this special, especially Harrison Ford, which, when you watch Harrison Ford in this special, you watch it and you're like, this is the moment that Harrison Ford decided that he wanted Han Solo to die so that he could never be in something like this ever again. That is what I got from this special. And then also Carrie Fisher, it looks like she's coked out of her mind in this. She couldn't care less. The only one that seems to maybe be having a little bit of fun with it is Mark Hamill, who manages to always have a smile on his face that actually seems kind of genuine, but also he looks very awkward in it, looking like a Ken doll. I mean, he's got a lot of makeup on him, especially him, and Carrie Fisher does too, and I think it was just the problem of they put too much makeup on them, but I mean, a lot of people that have reviewed this before have talked about that maybe it has something to do with Mark Hamill's car wreck, and they just put stuff on his face to fix his face up. I don't know this. Mark Hamill needs to come out and say if this is true or not, because I need to know. But at the end of the day, guys, there's really not much else I can say about this special. I mean, there's interesting stuff in it, but at the end of the day, it's just incredibly bland, incredibly boring, and ugly and hard to look at, especially with, you know, it not being an HD transfer or anything, but, like, it does not age well. I can definitely see why George Lucas is appalled by this, why he wanted to get rid of this special to make sure it never existed. It's just crazy that this thing even exists. It is, without a doubt, the worst piece of Star Wars material we have ever seen, and maybe will ever see. This is very embarrassing to watch, and I feel sorry for everybody that was involved with it. Well, guys, with all that said, I'm gonna give the Star Wars Holiday Special a 2 out of 10. This is one of the worst things I have ever seen, but it is not the worst thing I have ever seen, thus the 2 out of 10. But guys, that is it. That is the end of my year of Star Wars reviews. I hope you enjoyed this review and all the other reviews that I did before this. This has been an incredible journey. It's been a lot of fun. I've been introduced to so many different things. This, droids, Ewoks, and the Ewok movies, which I had never seen before, and I ended up enjoying some of those quite a bit. But also we get things like this, which is incredibly terrible and bad. Now, you guys might be wondering that I didn't talk about several other things that are Star Wars related, and that's because, well, they weren't finished at the time. I mean, I still have the animated show, The Forces of Destiny, I think it is. That's a web series. I still have to talk about that at some point. And then also, Star Wars Resistance is almost finished with its second season, so I'll be reviewing that soon. We've got Star Wars The Clone Wars Season 7 coming out, and then, of course, The Mandalorian and many other Star Wars shows coming out and movies. And Star Wars is not leaving anytime soon, so I'm going to be continuing to talk about it throughout the years, hopefully. But this, at this point, is the end of my year's Star Wars, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and have a Merry Christmas.